So once again, a very warm welcome to all of you. We're very grateful to be having such an exciting opportunity to talk about some of the most beautiful practices that exist in the Tibetan contemplative tradition and the Buddhist contemplative tradition in general. Because how often do we get a chance to gather with like-minded people and discuss things like kindness and compassion, empathetic joy, tenderness, warmth, warm-heartedness, and so forth. At least in my life, even though I'm a Buddhist monastic engaged in a lot of the discussion around these practices, even for me, that's a relatively rare opportunity. And so I'm very, very excited to be sharing this course with you, so graciously hosted by CCN. And of course, my aspiration for this course is for all of us to have an opportunity to share these profound practices, to cultivate some confidence in these practices, to experience these practices for ourselves, so that later on we can share them with the world, not necessarily as teachers or instructors and so forth, even though, of course, that's one possibility, to get trained in all of these things, to share them with the world in a professional capacity as a counselor, a therapist, and so forth. But beyond that, for us to share these just in terms of our actual behavior, in terms of the way we show up in this world, in terms of what we do, both on the group level, or collective level, and on the personal level in our relationship with ourselves, with our peers, with other people, and then with the planet. So that's the aspiration there, to develop some confidence and to truly become the people who can radiate the qualities of the four immeasurables to others and to the world at large. So that's the basic idea. We'll talk about our own aspirations a little bit later. We'll share what might feel right for us in this moment or for the duration of this course, which will take up most of our summer, actually. Pretty exciting or pretty daunting, depending on how you feel about things like that. But before we do all of this, we'll start with the first practice for today, and we'll do more meditations later. And that first practice will be very familiar for those of you who have been students of CCN or students of Lama Alan Wallace, Glenn Svensson, Evan and Tanya, the guiding teachers for this community, or actually students of the Tibetan tradition in general, where you would very frequently come across this practice of releasing everything and resting in naturalness. So to do this, let's find a comfortable stationary position. And even in looking for that position, let's already apply some level of kindness and warm-heartedness towards ourselves. So we'll choose something that does support our body and does feel nice. For some, that would be perhaps the supine position, lying flat on our back in the so-called Shavasana posture, quite familiar to many experts in yoga present here. For some others, it would be the position where we're sitting upright. And because of being the host for the Zoom session and having to flip through the slides, that's what I'm using. It would be quite unusual for the course facilitator to be in the supine position for the duration of the class. So I'm not doing that. Thank God, but I'll be sitting here upright and yet maintaining a level of comfort in my body because I'm sitting quite nicely. I'm on a comfortable cushion, comfortable couch, actually comfortable sofa. So I can allow my body to rest easily and I can allow my awareness to be present with the body. So once we have found that position, that posture that supports us in this practice, and yet does feel nice and relaxing, the first thing to do is to bring our awareness, bring our attention to the body. Noticing the experiences of the body, the position of the body, and especially the parts of the body currently in touch with the ground, currently in contact with the earth, the element of the earth, represented by the experiences and the qualities of stability, firmness, represented by its ability to support and hold us. And so noticing those parts of the body, whether that's our buttocks, the backside of our legs, our feet, maybe our lower back, or if we're meditating in the Shavasana position, the whole backside of our body. Noticing the sensations there. And then releasing ourselves, letting go, and trusting ourselves to the ground. Letting our body rest freely on this surface, supported by the earth element, and especially supported in this process of gradually, slowly, and gently releasing physical tension. In that, we can, for a little while, be aware of our feet and toes, letting go of the tension there. Our legs. The muscles of our pelvic floor. The abdominal area and the lower back. Our chest. Our shoulders, upper arms. Then the area around the elbow, our hands, and our fingers. Checking to see if there's any tension there or any movement, perhaps. And letting it all go to rest in a state of ease and naturalness, slowly extending throughout our body. Then our shoulders, our neck, along with the throat, the backside of our head, our crown, and then our facial muscles. Checking to see if there is any tension in the face, in our lips, our nose, our forehead. And then once again, extending our awareness to all the parts of the body at once. And in that process, noticing that the body is breathing naturally right now. We are hopefully not controlling the breath, not trying to hold it, not trying to force it, but instead with some tenderness and appreciation of the body, allowing it to choose its own rhythm, choose its own volume of breathing. And in that way, to be sustained by the energy of the breath, or the energy exchange between our body and the rest of the planet, occurring with the breath by means of breathing. So for a little while, we'll just breathe calmly like that, noticing the tactile sensations of breathing as they occur throughout the body. And then while still resting in this state of relative physical ease, verbal ease, or silence, and perhaps even mental ease, where we're truly present with what's going on right here, right now, we can simply allow ourselves to feel that we are here intentionally. We're showing up not just for this course and other participants and the organizers and so forth. We're showing up for ourselves because we think it's meaningful. It's a meaningful endeavor. And with this perspective, we can allow ourselves to feel that we are in the right place at the right time with the right intentions. And even without generating any specific intentions right now, generating a very specific motivation, which we would normally do for these types of practices. Even without doing that, we can just truly wish for this process, for this course, for this session to be most beneficial. May every moment of every class in this course and every moment of this very session be truly beneficial for me and all sentient beings. Anchoring this intention in the depths of our body, speech, and mind, but of course, especially our mind as the root of all of our activity. We can then allow ourselves to just notice the experiences of the body once again, checking on the body to see how it feels, how we feel through the body. And then introducing some very gentle movement to the body by perhaps rocking back and forth very gently, or moving our fingers, moving our toes. Maybe for some of us, even stretching or even doing a little poppy dance or victory dance, whatever feels right and feels most appropriate for us to be able to come back to the body and anchor ourselves in its experiences right now. Thank you. Just as a preliminary note, we will have 10 sessions in this course, and then there's also the additional 11th session, which will be on the topic of the four immeasurables as seen through the depths of the Buddhist, or specifically Tibetan Buddhist tradition. Whereas in the first 10 sessions, we'll be discussing the more general ideas that would be hopefully equally appropriate for those who are practicing in the context of the Buddhist path, but also for those who are following other great spiritual and religious traditions, or are simply practicing the path of secular humanism, or some other secular approach that has nothing to do with any religious values, ideas, philosophies, and so forth. So while we're doing that, in these sessions, I would still be making this gesture, not because I'm trying to introduce any extra religious elements. Obviously, I'm already a man in a skirt, so a monastic, as you call those in some traditions. So that's religious enough. And behind me, you can see some sacred images of the Tibetan tradition, very helpfully wrapped in plastic. But that's not why I'm using this gesture. The gesture is a typical gesture of welcoming or gratitude. And every time I do that after each meditation, that's just for me to share my deepest gratitude and appreciation for all of us being here and sharing these practices, doing these practices together. So that's the basic idea, nothing super religious about it. A very timely and helpful question here in the chat. May I ask how long each session is? Each session is just 2 hours. Of course, if someone's time is limited, you have to leave early and so forth. That happens. What to do? No problem at all. That's one of the reasons for why we're recording these sessions, so that people who for some reason have to leave early or can't join because of being in a different time zone and so forth can always catch up if they choose to. But of course, we're very much hoping they would choose to. And on another technical note, there is also the live transcript option available in Zoom. So if you prefer to have subtitles, even though they're not always perfectly accurate, but they're quite good. If you prefer to have subtitles to understand my weird broken English and my strange accent, you could always turn those on in your Zoom settings. There's the button for that that says CC. To share other technical notes, we'll be going to the slides, and in advance I have to apologize both for them being very basic and not very playful, fun, not full of pictures and so forth, and also for my occasional misprints, which would hopefully provide some basis for feeling entertained and laughing on occasion, which tends to happen when I show my slides. So that's the first slide, an introduction to the four immeasurables. That's the name of this course. The person showing the slides for this course and trying to narrate them is Lobsang Tenpa. And the course is organized by the Contemplative Consciousness Network, and you can see the website there. We would very much hope that you're already a subscriber of our newsletter so that you're getting all the updates about upcoming events and so forth. But if not, we're very much inviting you to subscribe just to keep up with what's going on with CCN. And also, of course, if you are a social media user, there is also a Facebook account, an Instagram account, and so forth. To answer another question here in the chat, will the slides also be made available as resources in addition to the recordings? Yes, they very much will. So you will always get links to these slides after each session. There will be links to guided meditations to practice, and those would be dependent on the content of each specific session. There would also be some suggestions for further reading. And in a few minutes, I will also mention our primary reading sources for this course as well. So you get the recordings, you get the slides, you get the guided meditations, you get the additional reading, and you get some creative prompts for journaling or drawing or painting or for writing poetry and so forth. And you can use them in various ways depending on what feels most appropriate to you individually. So all together, that would hopefully be combined into a very pleasant and fruitful process of working with the four immeasurables from different angles. That's the basic idea here. So we're in session one. That should be obvious, hopefully. This is the first time we're gathering, but hopefully not the last. And I'm very much hoping that the majority of you would go through all the 10 sessions, even though I should say that the topic of the four immeasurables, along with the practices that come out of the four immeasurables, such as the Buddhist practice of bodhicitta or the secular practice of altruism and altruistic behavior, altruistic activity, and so forth. I very much think that even if it was just 3 or 5 people here, but we were truly working on these practices and cultivating them, that would already be so meaningful and so worth it in terms of everyone's time and of course my own time as well. If I can in any way contribute to all of us, including myself, deepening our experience of these practices and these values and these qualities, that is already making my life meaningful. That being said, it's always very encouraging when there's more people joining, because then we know we all become ambassadors for these qualities, and then we share them with the world, and there's this effect, these qualities being spread more and more openly and having a greater effect on the world that needs healing so desperately. So we're in session one, and we just did our introductory meditation on releasing and resting. There were various ways of practicing this method. There are various names for it. People who have studied with Lama Alan Wallace would most likely know it as settling body, speech, and mind in its natural state. And that seems to be one of the names given to this practice by the great Indian contemplative Padmasambhava, who brought this practice to Tibet. However, there are other variations of the same practice. Sometimes we make emphasis on a slightly different sequence of steps. There's no shortage of different ways of doing this practice. In some cases, we would do gradual process of relaxation like we did just now. In some cases, we wouldn't. In some cases, we would attend to body and then to our body and then to our speech and then to our mind. In some cases, we would just release all types of activity by going straight into the core of our awareness and so forth. So there's no shortage of different versions of this. And a much simpler name for it is to simply call it the practice of preliminary relaxation, just relaxing deeply. Yes, for the watercolors, we will be using some works by John Warwick Smith, very fortunately in the public domain now. So just, to add some color, but also some beauty to it, perhaps on occasion, and to feel good, because our practice does grow stronger when there's aesthetic support for it. And later in the course, we'll talk about that. How can we use different types of aesthetic beauty in our lives to support our contemplative practice, including, of course, our practice of the four immeasurables. So we did our preliminary relaxation, even though normally in all the ensuing sessions, we will very deliberately focus on generating a specific beneficial motivation for each session, for each practice, and so forth. I wanted to do our first meditation session in a slightly different way, and that's how we did it. Instead of generating a very specific intention that would, for example, for Buddhist practitioners, say something like, I am doing this to become fully awakened for the benefit of all sentient beings, and so forth. Or for those practicing in a more secular context, would imply something like, I'm working on cultivating the good qualities of my own mind, so may this practice contribute to that. Instead of all of that, I wanted to focus on a very simple intention that is, however, also seen as a very powerful aspiration and in some cases, even an aspiration prayer of sorts. May I do what's most beneficial, or may I do what's truly beneficial. So in this case, may every moment of this course be beneficial, bringing benefit to myself and others. That is in itself, generating that intention, generating that idea, that aspiration, is a powerful practice that can be done at any moment of any day, but also in special places and on special occasions, just to realign ourselves with the quintessential meaning that we perhaps want to give to our life. Yes, we all have individual aspirations that are very specific in some cases, or maybe not yet, but they might become specific one day. And yet at the core of it, thinking just about the idea of truly living a beneficial way of life, leading a beneficial way of life, being of benefit to ourselves and others, both at the same time, with no contradiction there. That's a lovely practice that I have learned from my teachers, and then I try to do on occasion. And every time people ask me for advice, since I'm not clairvoyant and I'm also not very intelligent, when people ask me, oh, should I go to this college or that college? Unless there's some obvious bit of advice that could be given on the basis of common sense and reasoning and logic, all I can do is tell people about this practice that I've learned from one of my teachers, and that is just to keep generating that intention. May always do what's most beneficial. We'll come back to that later in the course as well. But just generating that and knowing that this in itself can gradually affect all of our actions, all of our intentions, and hopefully this course as well. Before progressing with the actual content and talking about the practices, the meditations, and so forth, and then doing more meditations. In each session, we'll try to meditate quite a lot, actually. This is a practice-oriented course, not so much on philosophy, but really about the practice and learning the bones of the practice, but then also using those bones to get some meat of experience on them. Before that, I would also very much like to mention these community agreements. They're absolutely quintessential for keeping a safe container. So allow me to talk you through them, explain each one of them in brief, and then if there's any questions, please feel free to ask them in the chat, which is always the idea here at any point during any session, except for perhaps the meditations. You're very welcome to share any questions in the chat. But the way we ask those questions or observations or comments actually relies on these agreements. So the first agreement is confidentiality, and there's two sides to it. One side is that we're not recording your faces and so forth. That's quite obvious. We're on the internet. Some people might not be comfortable for that, or their job is not perfectly, their employer would not be perfectly happy to see them online in some Buddhist course and so forth. So there are many situations like this. So we're not recording your faces, obviously, or your voices most of the time either. But on occasion, of course, we're all sharing something in the chat. For example, starting from session 2, we will be sharing some observations about our practice and how the preceding week felt, and how we might have faced some obstacles in this specific meditation or some resistance to it, and then this happened. Basically, some snippets of our experience, we are sharing them. So when I'm reading them out for the sake of the recording, I'm not reading out the names specifically for confidentiality purposes. It's not that I don't want to read your names, even though in some cases, of course, I'd be a bit hesitant to mispronounce someone's name, and we wouldn't want to do that. But the general idea is that I'm not reading out the names for confidentiality purposes. And for that reason, we're also not copying things from the chat and then pasting them somewhere. We're not taking screenshots of the chat or anything, just because we want to keep that level of safety for everyone involved. However, I am reading these out so that both the observations and the responses to them are recorded. And then whenever people watch this course, if anybody wants to do that for some reason, they would also know what was happening in the chat, what were the questions asked, and so forth. So there's that. The other side of it is that when we do get to doing little group activities in breakout rooms, and those of course are not strictly obligatory, because if you absolutely can opt out if you have strong social anxiety or not, your internet connection is not too good or something. People have different reasons for not joining those. However, when we do get to those, the breakout groups, those little groups that we would put you in, would not be recorded. They're confidential, and whatever is shared in those groups is just for the members of that specific group. So that exchange is private and confidential, and then outside of that group space, we would not be quoting what was said unless we truly change all the details so that it becomes not recognizable, or it becomes completely generic and then doesn't feel like a violation of someone's privacy. So that's another side of it. These are the two general ideas. We're keeping some level of confidentiality with the chat, and also in the chat, you're always welcome to, when you want to share something, but you don't want to share it with everyone, you can address it to me personally. You can message me personally in the chat instead of sending it to the entire group. Then, of course, nobody but me would know that that's an observation from your specific side. The other principle here is, of course, respecting other participants and respecting that we're all different. We come from different backgrounds. We have different experiences. We are, perhaps we have had different conditioning, and that's something to be curious about, to be empathetic about, to be open towards. But another side of this principle of respect is manifest in the next point here, the point of nonviolence, and that is should manifest in us, first of all, and I can't stress that enough, not offering any comments about anyone's appearance, physical appearance. And I'm mentioning that because in another course that I'm teaching right now, we recently had a very, very unexpected episode where someone decided it was appropriate to share their opinions about another person's facial piercings. And that was done in a very violent and in a very unkind manner, with no regret afterwards and really no recognition of the harm done. So even though that had never happened before in my experience, I would absolutely want to mention that we are not making any observations about any other participants' bodies, because that's not at all why we're here. And also that wouldn't be kind or compassionate or really joyful or equanimous either. So no to that. But beyond that, it's also good to mostly share things from our own perspective. So share our experiences with the practice, our questions, and so forth, and not to offer advice here in this specific content, in this specific container. Of course, there are other situations in our life when we are invited to give advice, that's fine. But here, not so much. Also, no psychoanalyzing each other. That's not why we're here. We're here to work on our own practice and our way of dealing with the world. And we're not here to play the role of a therapist for others, even if we are a professional therapist. This is just not the place for us showing up in that capacity. This is more for learning and practicing. Even though I should say that one time when I was teaching a class in Russia, there was a psychiatrist who showed up because she was truly curious to observe me and to see whether I'm indeed sane or not so much. But luckily, she was kind enough to say I do appear to be somewhat sane, well, actually quite sane, even though I seem to have this big thing about Buddhist practice and its efficiency. So, okay, good enough. I'll take that. That's a compliment of sorts. But we're not here for that, you know. We're here to work on our practice of love, compassion, and so forth. And so let's focus on that and be nonviolent in how we share with others. Of course, that leads us to the next point. We need to be interested in the practice itself. Otherwise, why are we here? It's not just to discuss interesting philosophical ideas, even though, of course, there is space and time for that, not just in the Buddhist tradition, but in all the great wisdom traditions of the world. There are many wonderful ideas and texts and quotations, and we could spend hours debating them, analyzing them, dissecting them. We could have public dialogues, private journaling and so forth about all of that. And that would be very exciting. And it's certainly done in the Buddhist tradition as well. But the methods that we're working with here, the methods of the four immeasurables, are very practice oriented, and they're practice oriented with regards to our meditation. We cultivate them through formal and informal meditation. And they're also very practice oriented in terms of our behavior, in that the best practice of loving kindness, after having cultivated it in our mind and heart, is to go and do things that are kind, but also wise at the same time. So that's the practice we would also, of course, want to accomplish. So mostly that, cultivating these in our mind and heart, and then applying them in our behavior to truly bring more kind, more compassionate, more joyful, and more equanimous ways of behaving to this world. That would be the aspiration. So less on the philosophical debate for this specific course, more on truly trying to take it on, try it out, see if it works, and see if there's anything we can adjust if it doesn't work. Maybe we can switch the method or adjust it or change this detail here, that detail there, or maybe something's missing and we can truly check what is missing, what can I add? And so all together with all of this, we can then truly, by the end of this course, privately and humbly say, hey, I am an aspiring yogini or an aspiring yogi of loving kindness or compassion or equanimity or empathetic joy, of all of it together. That would be a high and mighty statement to the Tibetan tradition were we to make it publicly, especially if we said, I am a yogi. That's a very, very tall order, because the meaning of the word yogi in Buddhism, and especially in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, entails something much larger than just being a practitioner of yoga. However, being able to say in private, hey, I am truly a practitioner of these things, in that I am practicing them. And from that point of view, I am an aspiring yogini of this stuff. I am on the trajectory towards realizing these practices. That would be absolutely a valid and fine statement as well. That would really make us feel good about ourselves. And that's something that we really need as well. Feeling good about the fact that we are doing something meaningful with our body, with our speech, with our mind, with our heart, with all of the talents that we have. And all of that would come from practicing. Then when we share, we exchange personal experiences. So not so much commenting on the experiences of others, but just sharing what happened with us. And it can be something very simple, like I didn't do the meditations this week because I got really distracted, or something's happening in my life, or maybe I was just not up for it, and so forth. Or sharing things like, I did the meditation 2 times and that felt nice, but I want to explore it more. Or maybe I did the meditation 50 times. Whatever it is, just sharing it, because we know other people would have similar experiences. There would be people who also didn't do the meditation. There would be people who also faced some difficulties in that meditation. There would be people who did the meditation. But it's also not consistent, because next week something might happen in their lives. And then they would be able to very much relate to the idea that, yes, sometimes we do skip our practice. I even know, I know a lot of meditation teachers, professional meditation instructors, who don't always do the same amount of practice, because it depends on the outer circumstances. It is contextual. They still maintain the core of their practice, for sure. But depending on the circumstances, they would have more or less time, more or less energy for this or that specific formal practice. So at least we try to keep the core, and trying to master that core and always hold it in our life is one of our big aspirations for this course. When asked about the best way to prepare for a long-term meditation retreat, Lama Wallace was, of course, one of my primary meditation teachers. On occasion would say that the best way to prepare for a long-term meditation retreat, and maybe we do have those aspirations to do a long period of intense solitary practice one day, or group practice. Well, the best way to prepare for that, according to Lama Allen, is to integrate our Dharma with our daily life, to truly learn how to practice Dharma in our daily life all the time. And the practices that we're going to be working with are exactly about that. They are a perfect way to learn to practice the essence of contemplative life, the essence of Dharma, the essence of wisdom and compassion pretty much all the time when we master them to that degree. So this would also be a perfect preparation for any intense retreats that we might want to do later in our life, even if those retreats, those more intense retreats, would be on other types of practices. In the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, at least, most other practices, especially the advanced practices that we're going to discuss in session 11, in the additional session for this course, most of those advanced practices cannot be truly and successfully applied without having some experience and some mastery of the four immeasurables and the qualities that underlie the four immeasurables, such as the qualities of ease and relaxation, of course, the quality of wisdom as well. So that's why there's no experience that would not be worthy of sharing in that regard. However, one little note there, facetiously quoted from Friends, the TV series, if anybody remembers that back in the days, and that's how I learned my English. So no, don't be surprised that my English is so limited. Share, don't scare. So the idea is to share something, but not perhaps to divulge our darkest fantasies and secrets and our crimes or whatever it is that might be a bit scary or jarring or jolting for other people. So just using our common sense with regards to how much we want to share. And also, of course, with curiosity, reading about the experiences of others, attending to the experiences of others, because this is not just about one person sitting here. It's about all of us together in an imaginary virtual circle, sitting together, activating our Buddha nature, and then sharing it with each other. And when you have all these shining Buddha natures around, 33 people, and more so with those who are following by means of their recordings, you would naturally be curious at how everybody else is shining in their own unique way. So that's what we do. Not just sharing, but also attending. And finally, for the sharing, a very good way to do that is to apply the so-called 3 or 4 sieves, but at least amongst those 4 sieves, and those are, is it true? Is it helpful? Is it necessary? Is now the right time? Or is it kind? Is it true? Is it kind? Is it necessary? Is now the right time? At least asking ourselves, is it necessary? And are these words kind? Because once again, if we are about to share a snarky comment or a bit of advice that was not invited, asking ourselves, hey, is that truly kind? Would I want to receive that? At least, does this person want to receive that? That's an even bigger question there. If the answer is probably not, maybe we can let it rest. We can let it dissolve back into the space of our mind for the time being, and then seek a more skillful way of offering our help later in the future, or just letting it go and generating good intentions to be able to show up in more helpful ways for everybody involved later in the future. So these are the community agreements. We would sometimes come back to them, but once again, I very much would like to invite all of us to truly take them up as a way of practicing kindness and compassion, both. Why? Because truly they make our container safe. They make this practice container for those showing up live by means of the Zoom meeting. They truly make our container safe, and they already allow us to think about others. I'm sharing because I want to support others. I'm reading about the experiences of others because that's their experience. It's not just mine. It's not just about me, obviously, but it's also about me. It is about me being able to show up, to share, to offer, to be generous, to be kind. And that's why I can adjust everything that I'm doing with my body, but here primarily everything that I'm doing with my fingers as I'm typing away, everything that I'm doing with my attention on the level of our mind. How am I attending to the experiences of others and to the practice itself? So these are guidelines for the practice of kindness, and they mostly arose, all of these, through experience or through different groups sharing them with each other. There are sometimes more expansive lists. Sometimes these are condensed into fewer points, but I think some of them very recognizable and absolutely indispensable. So that's how I try to think of them. And even talking about them in a way for me is a reminder for myself to be a more kind, more civil, more wise, more compassionate person. Okay, if any questions arise, of course, feel free to ask. Moving on, a very familiar combo here, deeply familiar for those who have studied somewhat, or have studied something in the Tibetan cultural tradition. This is not only a Buddhist thing, it also is used in some other areas of knowledge, but strongly associated with the Tibetan culture. And before that, of course, it came from India, where it was successfully used by such masters as the Buddha himself. These 3 steps, which would be quite important for our practice of loving kindness, etc., are exploring the explanations, or hearing the explanations, reading the explanations, looking at the slides, looking at the book, watching the short videos that we're going to offer up, and so forth. So absorbing the information and understanding it conceptually, because we have a certain level of intelligence, and that intelligence allows us to understand the words, to see the meaning, to read the book and understand what's being said, and so forth. And if needed, we can always ask questions, ask for clarification, or we can make notes, we can make charts, and so forth. There are multiple ways of processing information in that way so that we understand it basically on a conceptual level. And then on the second stage, once we have absorbed that information, and that stage is sometimes, the first stage is sometimes referred to as listening or studying. On the second stage, we then want to apply that information to our own life, to our own experience. And this is where together, we will be doing such things as journaling exercises. We'll be exchanging ideas in the chat. We will be doing some creative exercises as well for those who are into that, who are inspired by that. And then on occasion, we would also be doing group activities where we are divided into small groups and we can share something with others in a very organized, specific manner that keeps the process safe for everyone involved. We're going to use very specific guidelines for that. But all of that is an addition to our own process of thinking, hey, how does this apply to me? And this stage, of course, might seem like, once again, moving towards the direction of selfishness, where we stop and we think, hey, how does this affect me? How does this work in my case? What about me? What's the connection between Lobsang and this topic, or whatever our name is, right? So thinking about that, that might seem like already moving away from the community aspect or the interconnection, interbeing aspect, and focusing on ourselves. But actually it's not, because we're not only thinking about our exciting stories of ourselves, we're also truly analyzing the way that we connect to others, our behavior towards others, and so forth. And in some cases, those types of contemplation can be quite uncomfortable, and yet we are invited to still do them. So one of the practices that we're not probably going to do in this course, but that I like to sometimes offer up in different group modalities that have to do with emotional intelligence and emotional balance, and that I also do on occasion myself. It's a very valuable question for me, is asking myself whether other people perceive me as a difficult person. And not random people. Of course, there's always someone who doesn't like us in the world, and someone who is not comfortable with us, or someone who hates us. That's fine. That welcome to our world, welcome to samsara, or welcome to the internet, really, because if you are on social media, there's always going to be someone not happy with your presence there and the way you're showing up. But not that. Truly thinking whether the people around me, my loved ones, on occasion sigh deeply and say, yeah, he's a lot. He's not easy to be around. We love him, but wow, he is difficult. And I mean, some people present here are my personal friends, and they do say that about me, I guess, on occasion. But then I can ask myself, hey, how can I bring more humor, more lightheartedness, more kindness, more ease into the way that I am? Because I can change. All of us can change. And I don't want to be, at least I don't always want to be the difficult person. I also want to be the cool, funny uncle, not just the grumpy uncle at all times. So I ask myself that, and that actually keeps me right on track, at least in terms of what Daniel Goleman calls social intelligence, the way I understand my interactions with others and the way I affect their lives. So even that level of this second stage, personal contemplation, is helpful. Completely secular, nothing Buddhist about it. Am I a difficult person? Am I nice and easy to be around? Doesn't mean I need to become a human pleaser. And in my case, that's not really likely because I am too much of a grumpy uncle, but maybe I can be a bit more easygoing on occasion, less high maintenance, and so forth. Doesn't mean I change the core of who I am, especially if the working hypothesis for this course that says that our very core is loving kindness, compassion, all of those qualities combined. If that's my very core, I don't need to change that. I need to uncover my true essence. I need to release it. I need to let it shine to a greater degree instead of being stuck in the grumpy mode at all times. So contemplation is very, very important. And for the more insight-oriented practices, this contemplation would take a slightly different tone, perhaps, because we would be truly thinking about such principles as interdependence, impermanence, selflessness, emptiness, union, non-duality, and so forth, all these different ideas that the great wisdom traditions describe. But for kindness-related practices like this one, a lot of the contemplation would have to be about our behavior and our habitual ways of thinking about ourselves and others. For example, am I kind with myself? What's my level of self-compassion? Is it sufficient? Am I too hard on myself sometimes? Or do I indulge in all my negative habits and think that is self-compassion instead of what self-compassion truly is, and so forth. So all those types of contemplation, very helpful. And of course, some of those can be done with the support of a professional therapist or counselor or psychologist or coach. And some of them we are perfectly capable of doing on our own. That's the idea there. And finally, practical application, including meditation, means that at some point we do get to the quote unquote cushion, but most of us, or many of us, might actually not have a meditation cushion. We just meditate sitting on a chair or on the floor or on a sofa or lying down in the supine position and so forth. There are multiple options there. So the constant incessant references to a cushion are not always working, and they don't always work for everyone. But that's still a helpful metaphor. So we do get to our practice seat or to wherever it is that we lie down to practice, and we do the practice. And in addition to that, we also do the informal level of practice, which is something that we're going to discuss a lot in this course. How do I practice loving kindness informally throughout the day? And especially if we do end up having the 6-day, 5-day, 4-day loving kindness retreat, hopefully sometime later this year, we will also experiment with a lot of that in sort of retreat conditions where there's also a lot of opportunity for mastering these different types of loving kindness, for example, practice, formally and informally both. However, even during the course, we would, of course, share many ideas about all of that. And finally, beyond formal and informal meditation, there's just the practical application of kind behavior, compassionate behavior. And we would hopefully see some basic ideas. I mean, that's definitely in the plan. We would see some basic ideas, not just about being kind in one-to-one interactions, and that's already incredibly important, and that's where we start, but also being kind, compassionate, and wise with regards to the larger systems that we are integrated into. So the slogans, such slogans as check your privilege and think about the systems of oppression and so forth and so forth, they're very important to analyze, think, and work with as well in the context of these practices. Otherwise, these practices fall short of truly making us into agents of compassionate change. And we might want to become those agents. We might want to bring healing to the world. And in some cases, that means applying institutional pressure. So we'll consider that as well, to a certain degree. We'll lay the foundation for deeper exploration of all those topics, which also can be quite nice. So these are the three essential stages that we're working with. And our reading for this course is this wonderful book by Lama Alan Wallace, Dr. Alan Wallace, Dr. B. Alan Wallace, in fact, called The Four Immeasurables, Practices to Open the Heart. I think it was originally published by Snow Lion, which later transferred to Shambhala Publications. And if you want to purchase the book, you have the options of getting a paper copy, paperback. There's a digital book sold by such vendors as Amazon through their Kindle system and so forth. And there's also an audio book, so the narrated version of the same thing. I'm quite familiar with this book, not just because I've been reading, rereading and using it for many years, but also because I had the incredible privilege of translating it into Russian and then narrating the audio version for that. So it went quite deep into my subconscious mind, I guess. So we'll be slowly reading this book for this course. However, the topic of the four immeasurables is in a way measurable, no pun intended, in that there's so many teachings on these four qualities. There are so many sources on them in the Pali language, in Sanskrit, in Tibetan, in Chinese, in Japanese, in Vietnamese, in Korean, and so forth, in the Western languages these days. There are wonderful new books about the four immeasurables published in English almost every year, and then also in other languages as well. So there is an incredible richness of literature on these practices. And in addition to that, also some traditional texts that we're going to be quoting from. However, because it's impossible to expect that people would read 10 books over the course of 10 meetings, at least try to read this one. And then beyond that, we'll also, of course, have a suggested reading list at the end of the course where you would see references to many more sources that could be worked with. Some of them very traditional, some of the Buddhist sutras or suttas and so forth. Some of them coming from the 15th century, 16th century, 18th century. Some of them very modern. Some of them published last year or this year. So it's a work in progress in a way, but we start somewhere, and this is a very good, of course, way to begin. However, for additional reference, I would very much like to highlight these two books by two other of my primary mentors, His Holiness the Dalai Lama and Venerable Bhikshuni Thupten Chodron, who is these days His Holiness's primary English editor, working on a long series of incredible guidebooks for the Buddhist path. So the book on the left is is a standalone edition. It's sufficient on its own. It's called Buddhism, One Teacher, Many Traditions. And to some people, it might read as a reference book more than a personal book where you can read stories and funny jokes and explanations and ideas and examples and so forth that to truly get you going, energized and inspired. So it's more of a reference book in that it goes through some key aspects of the Buddhist path and looks at them from the perspective of the three major traditions of practice still extant in this world. The incredibly rich Pali tradition, especially associated with the lineage of Theravada, the Tibetan tradition, which goes way beyond Tibet proper and is practiced in Bhutan, northern Nepal, northern India, Mongolia, the Buddhist regions of Russia, and so forth. And of course, the incredibly rich tradition of East Asian countries, which roughly covers China, not just mainland China, but also, of course, Taiwan and so forth, and Korea, Vietnam, and Japan. All of them have multiple unique lineages, multiple unique traditions, multiple unique ideas about the practice path, and yet there can be somewhat of a summary, and that's what's included in the book. So one of the chapters in that book is on the four immeasurables, and then so if later on you want to have that reference for the Buddhist, or very Buddhist-y explanation of the four immeasurables, that would be a very good source for that. There's a specific chapter for that. And then that chapter is elaborated on, unpacked with much greater detail in the book on the right, In Praise of Great Compassion, volume 5 of the series called The Library of Wisdom and Compassion by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. So these are not required readings. However, if you do have some extra time on your hands and you want to read something that goes back to the root sources for this, the Buddhist text, the Buddhist explanation, the Buddhist oral tradition, these would be guidebooks par excellence. That would be the perfect, well-tested sources that are also relatively recent because they have been published. One of them, I think, last year, one of them a few years ago. Would be good sources to work with. And then you would also see that Dr. Wallace in the preceding book is not making anything up. He's relying very firmly on the tradition, both oral and textual. A question here, I have Copy Boundless Heart published by Snowline, 1999. Is this the same book, but an earlier version as the one that you shared? Yes, I think it is the same version. They just flipped the name. It was originally called Boundless Heart, something for Immeasurables, and then they moved For Immeasurables to the front, and Opening the Heart became the subtitle for that. So yes, that would work as well. I don't think much changed between the two editions. So absolutely. And also for everyone, in addition to that, there's an audiobook because some people prefer to have an audiobook. And of course, let's make it sweet. If you like to listen to your book as you're taking a nice stroll, and this is the summer, let's enjoy that. That could be a thing. Some people I know like to sip their coffee and read a book. So then you have the paper book or the digital book, and you drinking your coffee, you're eating your carrot cake or whatever it is, and then you're reading the book. So let's make that experience nice for ourselves. That's also very important. It's not, the course is not intended to be us crying or suffering over the book late at night and being anxious that we're going to show up in the next class unprepared. Quite frankly, in all of the courses that I've ever taught in my life, a large percentage of the people joining would not read anything at all. And I think that's always the case with these things. What to do? We still get so much from the classes themselves, not because of me, but because of the slides. The slides share information with us. And guided meditation, that's good enough. But it really augments our experience if we are able to read some of this. And then beyond that, some people love to read everything. And they're really picky about reading the right things and then asking, well, how does the thing on the slide compare to what's here in the book? Which is also fine. Being inquisitive, having an inquiring mind. That's good. So that's why we have these sources. That's why I said you can check this source against these sources. And then we also have the list with all the extra information available beyond that. So this is on the reading, and slowly, we might get the book, we might start reading it, and we'll be moving through the main topics covered in Dr. Wallace's book. And of course, we'll be moving through the 4 immeasurables themselves. But in addition to these sources, I will of course be quoting all of these books as we go along, but we will also be quoting some of the traditional, truly incredible texts that are preserved in the Sanskrit tradition and the Tibetan tradition and the Pali tradition. And if any of them at some point make you feel in any kind of special way, if you feel especially inspired when you see the quote from that source or this tradition or this author, feel free, well, absolutely feel free, but please do explore those connections deeper, because it's wonderful to discover a connection like that, to see the quote from a specific author and feel, oh, that seems especially reasonable. I wonder what else this person wrote. And then you check it out, and that might be the beginning of a spiritual love affair that lasts for multiple lifetimes. That's good. So we have those opportunities. But before that, a little question for all of us about why we're here. So basically asking ourselves, what brought us here? What are our aspirations for this course? And this is something where I would invite you to share things in the chat. So a few words or a sentence or 2 sentences about why you decided to join this course. Not as I was getting incessant newsletters from CCN, and then I was like, okay, I'll join, just make it stop, make these emails stop. Not that, but what is of interest to you? What are your aspirations? What are your goals? What are your hopes, plans, and so forth? So those things, let's share some of them. in the chat, and it can be very personal or quite general. Either way is absolutely fine, but I'm just curious because, of course, that would allow me to adjust the material accordingly. And it's also an exercise in what Dr. Wallace refers to as cognitive intelligence, being intelligent about our ideas, about our wishes, our desires, our plans, our intentions, our aspirations. So shining the light of awareness on all of that and then bringing wisdom into that, that's cognitive intelligence. The word cognation refers to our ability to have desires, have wishes. So anything you might want to share in the chat, I'm very curious about it, and I'm going to read all of that out so that we can share that experience with everybody else in the group. Okay, so some points coming up here in the chat. I'm just going to read them out. To go deeper into the four immeasurables which you teach in CB, to make them a more integral part of my daily life. Yeah, absolutely wonderful. For those of you who have ever taken part in CB, that is the Cultivating Emotional Balance program, co-developed by Drs. Alan Wallace, Eve Ekman, and Paul Ekman. Four immeasurables is the practice of the four immeasurables is a very large part of that, but there's only so much time we can dedicate to it in a large overarching program like CB, and to get the opportunity to explore these in greater depth. Well, that's wonderful. I just completed the 8-week spring retreat on the Vajra essence and would like to integrate Dharma practice into daily life. So once again, for context, Dr. Wallace teaches this incredible annual 8-week retreats. And in the last few years, they have been on very profound material from the very heart of the Tibetan tradition, on the practice called Great Perfection, which is a very profound method for working with the deepest nature of our mind. And for many of us, including myself, there's a wonderful dance between those very profound teachings and these very practical ideas of the four immeasurables, which are also, of course, in a way very profound. And then in the way that we can integrate those profound teachings with our way of showing up in the world, where also practicing great perfection or not, we might want to be a kind, wise, sane person. And so four immeasurables are a wonderful way of going about that goal. I'd like to learn how to uncover these innate qualities and bring them into my daily life, particularly sympathetic joy, which can be quite challenging at times. I can definitely relate to that. I had the incredible fortune at one point, actually right as the pandemic was starting, to spend 2 months in retreat on sympathetic joy. And I can honestly say that was one of the most fulfilling experiences in my life, but also, of course, a wonderful way to cushion the blow for myself in terms of what was going on in the world. And sympathetic joy is, in a way, the unsung hero of the four immeasurables, which we all, the world at large, and all the Buddhist practitioners could use more of. We could practice it more, understand it to a greater degree, appreciate it more than we normally do, at least in the West, in Western Buddhist communities, where it's a lot of loving kindness, a lot of compassion, some equanimity, and just the passing thought of sympathetic joy. So absolutely, I share that aspiration as well. They're very relatable. Could you please contextualize Robert Thurman in the tradition? Well, that's a slightly unusual question in the context of offering our aspirations, but I guess I would say that Robert Thurman is a very respected student of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, very knowledgeable speaker on all matters pertaining to Tibetan Buddhism, and especially a very knowledgeable speaker that has a connection to both the Gelug and Nyingma traditions of Tibetan Buddhism. He's translated some texts from both traditions and has a wonderful way of integrating the ideas coming from those texts and also earlier teachings with what's going on in the world, with the ethical dimension of our news agenda, and with our daily life as well. So he's certainly a very inspiring speaker. He's one of the teachers of Dr. Alan Wallace. He taught him some Tibetan very, very early in the days, I believe. And a very knowledgeable representative of this tradition, who also has a very interesting historic ties with the early Buddhist and Hindu scene of the United States, and of course, with everything that then unfolded in the West in terms of these wonderful traditions coming to sort of the mass, to the masses and being practiced to a greater degree. I hesitate to go into this to a greater degree and talk about his specific qualifications here or there, and then his translation style and all those things, because that's kind of outside of the question, but I hope that that's helpful enough. We can always discuss that someplace else. So deepening the four measurables, and that was the next observation here. Wonderful. Yeah, that's definitely the goal. I just need more support and more communication, and try to use any possibility to take them in difficult time in my life. Absolutely, very relatable. I mean, that goes for all of us as we go through sort of this weird stage between the pandemic and perhaps COVID becoming endemic and so forth. And samsara is always difficult, but in addition to that, of course, so much suffering, so much harm, so much horror happening for those of us who have some ties to Eastern Europe or live in Eastern Europe or have escaped Eastern Europe because of the war and so forth. So every bit of support and community that we can offer to each other, I hope this course provides that as well. To practice loving kindness is everyday life and build emotional resilience in everyday life and build emotional resilience. Yes, absolutely. And next one of the main reasons to join this course is my desire to deepen my ability to rest and let go. Very important and very nice observation here, of course, because some of these practices, even though we think, oh, they would primarily help me with cultivating, I guess, heartfulness, kindness, benevolence, my ability to show up in kind ways and so forth. Many of these practices would also truly contribute to rest. And from my personal experience, they would also truly contribute to, excuse me, to our ability to rest deeply in our body, not just in our mind, which would, of course, have a very supportive effect on everything else that we do. So releasing more of our psychosomatic baggage, of the knots of tension, being able to deal with panic attacks better for those of us prone to them and so forth. These all also accompany, these achievements accompany the four measurables in their profound practice. So that's very good as well. A fresh opportunity to start exploring and practicing the four measurables again with a supportive group dynamic. Definitely. I think even if you are a true master of the four measurables, and that's my assumption in a way, in that most people here would have certainly greater experience than I do and greater knowledge as well. At least we're all revisiting the basics and we're all practicing the basics again, and the basics are always infinitely profound in a way. So even for those of you who are masters of this, and also for those who are complete beginners, there's no harm in revisiting the basics, and there's also always some benefit. And the next one, for the benefit of those in my community. Absolutely, that's also a wonderful, beautiful aspiration, because whatever it is that we're able to muster in terms of our own practice of this would naturally project outside towards our community. And then we also share these values because we talk to people about these things. We share the sources, we share the resources, we share the ideas, we share the words. In some cultures, until very recently, it was almost impossible to even find books that were specifically on compassion. And that's something that, well, now it's not surprising. And I'm trying to be very polite about this, but one thing that we kept discussing with my Russian-speaking contemplative community, Buddhist community, was that if we were to go on Amazon and put in the word compassion and look for books on compassion, a lot of sources would come up these days. There's a lot of wonderful guidebooks on that. But until very recently, if you were to do the same thing in Amazon's Russian counterpart, there would be hardly anything on this practice. And that was not at all a buzzword, but to make it into a buzzword, and then of course to go into the meaning of it and the practice of it and so forth, it is such an incredible offering to all the communities we might be a part of. So that's another aspiration there, perhaps. I want to find out how to integrate each of these into my daily life. Absolutely. To learn, build awareness of how I can be kinder to myself and then with others, then add this to my work. Absolutely, yeah. That will be the progression there. Cultivating kindness to ourselves, then cultivating kindness to others, and then integrating it in all the ways of us showing up for the society, in society. I'm trying to be a better person. That's the next observation here. And that's also probably the thing that I would say about myself. The main thing for when people ask these days, why are you a Buddhist? Why are you practicing these things? Why are you working with all this material? Well, it's to be a better person. That's my number one goal. Be a bit more sane, a bit more reasonable, a bit more kind, a bit more compassionate. That's the beginning. I can aspire for full awakening and so forth and have some hopes about those things, even though hopes eventually have to be released as well. But to become a nicer person would be a good goal for me. To remind myself, that's the next one, to remind myself of what really matters and create the habit of opening my heart. Yeah. Not just hearing about these principles, but also turning them into a habit. That's a very powerful idea. I'm taking it to refresh and build my understanding of the four immeasurables and Dharma to benefit myself and others. Absolutely. Yeah. Benefit ourselves and others both at the same time. Next one, because Lama Alan is my root master, and he repeated many times that this was the first practice when he came to Dharamsala, and I feel very curious. Yeah, I would say that with Lama Alan's life path, four immeasurables permeate his entire life. And in fact, his monastic name, where he was ordained for 14 years, was Jampa Kelsang, which literally means the fortunate age of loving kindness. So Kelsang is fortunate age, but Jampa means loving kindness. So it's sort of part of his secret essence, because apparently the idea is that you get these monastic names because the teacher sees a specific potential, a specific aspect of your Buddha nature and highlights that. So a part perhaps of that Buddha nature that was seen by Lama Alan's ordination master when he was becoming a monk was his loving kindness, and he's continued to teach it very, very extensively and very, very clearly throughout all these years. And there we go, all of us are here because of him teaching these things in a very coherent and clear manner, and also turning them into books and so forth and podcasts that we're benefiting from. The next point here, new to meditation in Buddhist traditions, just learning to walk. Absolutely, I think that learning four immeasurables as our first practice is one of the best things we could do. I sometimes say, from observing a lot of stuff in this world on different teaching modalities and so forth, that two practices seem to be the most commonly widespread, most commonly applied, and also probably the most helpful for most of us, especially in the secular context. And those are breathing meditation, especially natural breathing, and then loving kindness. So beyond that, we can master other types of concentration practices, the other immeasurables, compassion and so forth, but at least some level of being able to breathe mindfully and some level of loving kindness, that's a huge boost to our well-being. But to master all four immeasurables, to learn them, is a wonderful beginning. I can only hope, I wish that was what happened to me, but as I'm gonna perhaps share at some point, my entry to Buddhism was not through the door of the four immeasurables, or perhaps I was not open enough to pick up on that and instead focused for a long time on other aspects. And then the four immeasurables truly started shining for me and completely transformed my practice and my life. So that's, congratulations on coming across this material, not this specific course. There's nothing special about me showing these slides, but just the words and the roots of these teachings. That's something that can be very, very powerful. Next point here, sent to me privately, looking to address issues of anxiety and low self-esteem and deepen my Vajrayana practice and shamatha meditation to, of course, achieve the ultimate goal of enlightenment for the benefit of all beings. Absolutely, four immeasurables do help with anxiety and low self-esteem. They are absolutely indispensable for Vajrayana practice, and they do provide a huge boost to shamatha practice. And also, four immeasurables in themselves are shamatha practices, especially the first three. So from that point of view, those goals are very realistic, and hopefully all of this will contribute to that. Next point here, Anita Milosevic emphasized four immeasurables above everything else in her CCN trauma workshops. And of course, absolutely validly so. There are ways we can deal with traumatic activation through mindful breathing and so forth, through somatic practices and so on, but to truly change the fabric of what lies at the root of trauma. For immeasurables play a huge role in that. And that's why loving kindness, at least, and in some cases also compassion, are widely used in different secular modalities that are used for working with trauma, addiction, and so forth. I'm seeking to integrate the Dharma into daily life, to move from the intellect to the heart and then to action. To continue and to expand my learning, helping me to continue to integrate these teachings into my daily life. So one of the recurring themes is, of course, to integrate these into our daily life. That's a big thing. Next one, to deepen our understanding of the four immeasurables from the academic, intellectual to the experiential. As the late Master Thich Nhat Hanh said, the most important journey we will make in our lives is the one from the head to the heart. Absolutely so, very true. And I think, once again, from talking to people, I can say that that's even a journey that a lot of followers of the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, at least in the West, have to truly make, especially perhaps in the West, because, and I'm, of course, a good example of that. We come across these words about the four immeasurables and so forth, but until they truly start shining in our experience, they become a very powerful part of our experience. It takes some time, and in some cases, it doesn't happen for decades. I know people who never developed a specific taste or a feeling for the four immeasurables, even though they are Buddhist practitioners. And that's not to say they're doing anything wrong or they're not good practitioners or anything like that, but it's just culturally, contextually, in terms of the overall situation, all the circumstances, things never came together for there to be a very profound feeling about these. And hopefully that can still happen. I mean, that can happen at any age, at any time. So we'll try to work on that together. The next point here, I would like to bring these qualities into, my yoga practice and teaching yoga asana. Absolutely. Very, very good thing to add to our yoga practice and to yoga teaching if you're a yoga teacher. Then I asked to participate in the course because you're an excellent orator and wanted to keep diving into equanimity based on the conversations from CB and add to my personal practice and practice with others. Yes, equanimity is a tricky one, and hopefully our practice together would support all of us in that. But of course, then out of that equanimity arise the other immeasurables as well. So absolutely. I want to open and be more in touch with my heart and be more heartful with others. I would like to cultivate and share, demonstrate more compassion, exhibit more empathetic joy and love. And wouldn't it be wonderful? You know, imagine ourselves radiating these four qualities most of the time, day and night, or at least during the day, but also they affect the night and our dreaming. And we'll discuss that as well. The interplay between our dreams and the four immeasurables, dream yoga and the four immeasurables. So just imagine more and more people doing that. Wouldn't that be truly world changing, not just life changing, but world changing? To focus on embodying in a deeper way, more insightful way, these qualities in my daily relations, and so that I get to be more aware of how I interact and where my prejudices and fears rise to cause less than kind behavior, and to be in shared practice with all others on the course. That's a very interesting point. We have a researcher of prejudice episodes right here with us. I'm not going to put them on the spot, but just to say that actually that is a huge topic. The interplay between all these practices, mindfulness, four immeasurables, and so forth, and things like unconscious bias, microaggressions, and then in big ways, misogyny, homophobia, racism, etc. The big list of all these types of non-benevolence that we habitually adopt and then we express in the world, but in small ways, just us feeling slightly weird about someone and then blocking them out, not because we want to establish a healthy boundary, which is a completely valid thing and a necessary thing to do in some situations, but just because there is indeed some prejudice. So to even bring some attention to that, I'm very grateful that you do that, because this would be one of the things that we contemplate on a personal level. Hey, how much prejudice, how much bias there is in this specific feeling that I'm having, and how do four immeasurables, or how could four immeasurables affect that? My deepest gratitude for to all of you for sharing these, and one invitation would be for those of you who, through writing them down in the chat, felt, hey, actually, this is what I want, to take a note for yourself about your own personal aspirations. And then we'll be able to look back on those at the end of the course to see whether they have been fulfilled and whether there's further steps perhaps to take with regards to this aspiration, but also we'll be able to see if the aspiration itself changed. Maybe now we have larger goals. Or maybe on the contrary, instead of these large aspirations, we now understand, hey, and within that, I can focus on this small thing right now. Maybe just becoming kinder than this, more compassionate than that, more relaxed about this. That would also be quite interesting. So maybe take a note if you want to. That's just an invitation, not at all necessary. And then beyond that, perhaps one overarching idea there for all of us. We're also here to improve the quality of our life, the subjective quality of our life. So of course, actually, from the Tibetan Buddhist point of view, the four immeasurables also affect the level of our abundance and so forth. And we'll talk about that briefly in the 11th session, where we talk about Buddhist stuff like karma and so forth. But also we'll mention that in discussing a sympathetic joy, because there would be some very interesting quotes from Tibetan sources on how, the interplay between our material abundance and the immeasurables. But before that, of course, the subjective quality, how our body and how our heart and mind feel, and also our body by extension. And within that, two facets that I think are important to recognize. One of them is improving the subjective quality of our personal existence, so our personal level of happiness. I want to come out of this course as a happier person. This is me saying this about myself, actually. At the end of these 11 sessions, I do want to become even more happy, even more balanced, even more well. And doing this course, doing these classes already adds something to my well-being, because at least it adds a sense of meaning. I experience a sense of flow. There are positive emotions arising. I laugh at my own stupid jokes. That counts, you know, so hey, that's good. And these are three criteria for a happy life, or meaningful happy life, actually, according to Martin Seligman's early research. He then added some further characteristics to that list, but at least that: positive emotions, flow state, sense of meaning. Okay, so already that. But beyond that, beyond a personal change, also expanding our ability to positively affect group, social, and global processes, global dynamics, including those in the domains of ecology, culture, politics, and economics. Some of you who are following the activity of the Upaya practice community in the United States might know that just over the last few days, they ran, under the guidance of Roshi Joan Halifax, Upaya practice community ran a wonderful seminar about rematriating seeds. And so the topics of deep ecology, food chains, indigenous practices of earth caring about the earth and so forth. And that, just thinking about that whole domain, without going into the depths of it, thinking about how we deal with crops and seeds and food chains, food habits, and so forth. And of course, how we deal with indigenous groups, which have suffered so much because of colonialism. Just thinking about those things is a wonderful way to apply then the four immeasurables and make our ability to show up in this world larger, to extend that ability and to be a force for good, not just a force for cringe or a force for harm, which is what in many cases ends up happening, even with the best intentions that are not supported by both wisdom and compassion. So as an addition to that, a very necessary step there as well is to acknowledge the roots. And I like to do it in different ways. And we'll explore some of those later in the course. But in this case, I should just, with incredible gratitude and profound admiration, mention the names of the key teachers who, for me, influenced my understanding of the four immeasurables. This is not an exhaustive list of the masters that I took teachings from, not an exhaustive list of the masters that I had the privilege to translate for. I do have somewhat of an exhaustive list on my website because I think it's very important to acknowledge the kindness of our teachers, and especially the kindness of our Himalayan and Tibetan teachers, lest this whole thing becomes very colonial. And look at me, I invented this and now I'm teaching it for $99.99. No. Everything that I'm saying, with the exception of the nonsense that gets automatically added from my side, came through the incredible richness of the Indo-Tibetan tradition that goes all the way back into the past. And the most we could do is not to distort this tradition, but to see the core of it and truly apply it. And in the same way, we also appreciate the core of what was brought to us, not by just our spiritual ancestors, but also by our blood ancestors, being grateful for everything that they've brought to us, the good things. And then also everything that was brought to us by our land ancestors, in case we are, for example, joining this from unceded land, or even land that is still occupied by its original inhabitants, but appreciating their kindness in creating the little mandala that we find ourselves in. And in my case, I'm calling in from Nepal, which is an incredible, especially the Kathmandu Valley in my case, incredible melting pot for incredible richness of the tradition centered around the four immeasurables. But these are the specific shining stars for me that have affected my understanding of the four immeasurables, or from whom I have received a genuine experience of the four immeasurables when they attended to me, as in looking at me, talking to me, making jokes, or asking me something. As an interpreter, I've had to experience those things, and a lot of those things were very, very touching, because they did feel like a genuine projection of loving kindness and compassion and so forth. So of course, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who is my primary teacher, my root teacher in all things Buddhist and secular. Khandra Tsering, an incredible female practitioner and yogini, who is also known by other names in the FPMT community, simply known as Khandra, which just means a venerable Dakini, or venerable Skywalker, actually. But beyond that, she's also known as Khandra Kunga Bhumo, Khandra Namsel Droma, and so forth. She has different names in the Tibetan community. Khandra Tsering is the name that is coined based on her being one of the state oracles of Tibet, living in Dharamsala. Also, she spends a lot of time here in Kathmandu. So also an incredibly profound practitioner with an incredible ability to talk about the depths of compassion and love and interdependence on the basis of profound spiritual experiences. Then the great master Garchen Rinpoche was, of course, one of the gurus for Lama Alan Wallace. So is Khandra Tsering, so of course is, His Holiness the Dalai Lama. The Garchen Rinpoche, who amongst these teachers is unique in that he spent many years in concentration camp practicing kindness, practicing compassion, practicing wisdom, then uniting all of that with visualization practices, Vajrayana practices, practices of the nature of the mind, and so forth, and still came out of all those experiences as an embodiment of the quality that he himself calls kind love. In Tibetan, Jamtse, and we'll look at that term later in the course to see how interesting and incredibly rich that combination of two roots is, and how profoundly changing it can be if we follow Garchen Rinpoche's advice on it. And then two friends who were friends in school when they were little lamas, taken care of by incredible Brit by the name of Fred Abedi early in their days. Lama Zopa Rinpoche and Chokyamima Rinpoche, very well known around the world. They both have practice communities in the United Kingdom, in the United States, in continental Europe, in Asia, and so forth, all over the place. They come from very different lineages, but they have same teachers. Some of their teachers are the same. Some of their teachers were true embodiments of kindness and love. And when you meet these masters, both of them truly radiate love and compassion. But because they're different people, at least in our perception, you would see different facets of the four immeasurables being radiated and shared them. And then they also have the ability to talk about the four immeasurables in very inspiring ways, of course, guiding us in our practice. And then on the next generation, my two Western teachers, and I have many more Western teachers, male and female and non-binary and so forth. But amongst them, Lama Alan Wallace, of course, the guiding teacher for CCN, and Venerable Thupten Chögyam have been especially kind in providing ample instruction on the four immeasurables. I've mentioned their books earlier, books by both of them, written on their own and on the basis of the instructions they received from their teachers, or in collaboration with His Holiness in one case. So also incredibly indebted to both of them and their spiritual communities, including CCN, which has been a guiding light for many of us over these years. So that's just me expressing my admiration for these Dharma streams. And I was torn between naming this slide Dharma roots and Dharma streams. I do like the idea of roots, but I also like the idea of streams because it is something that is streaming into our mind, just like loving kindness then needs to stream out of our mind towards others. And since I'm very, very fascinated by the practice of Ecodharma, and we'll be teaching a course on it later this year. I think all of these natural metaphors can be a big support for our practices. So we have these outer aspirations as well, and those are also valid in addition to becoming happier and extending our ability to help others. So for example, just being able to tell people we joined a course on something nice, love, compassion, and so forth, that's pretty cool. Or maybe professionally, if you're a meditation instructor, a coach, a yoga teacher, a therapist, a counselor, a chaplain, and so forth. So people in those supportive professions, to become an expert in compassion. Not a small aspiration, but unless it comes out of a very ego-centered state of being a bit just wanting the fame and the praise and so forth, a valid aspiration, because we do need experts on compassion, just like we need experts on wisdom, people who embody compassion and then able to share it in a coherent manner with the world. Also good. Or, practicing all this stuff and maybe meeting some of these incredible beings, which I very much hope will happen to all of us many, many times, again and again, online and in person. That would be wonderful, because it truly is life-changing to meet those who embody loving kindness and compassion. And of course, there are many other beings in this world who do that. We don't always recognize them, but in some cases, they're our actual blood grandmother or our grandfather, or our child, or someone on the street that just passes by and truly radiates loving kindness to us. That's true. But also there's something special about, in addition to that, no contradiction there, about holders of wisdom lineages, male and female, and transcending the divide, who are able to guide us in practice. Absolutely fine. And even, practicing loving kindness, meeting the Dalai Lama, taking a photo with him, pretty cool, right? Something to rejoice in for the rest of us and practice empathetic joy with. But beyond that, the thing that we should not perhaps forget, ideally, we can keep in our mind, is this aspiration to change myself to be able to help others to a greater degree. So I will become happier, but also to extend that to others as well. Just like here, just like in this picture. So beyond that, a very good place to begin, and that's the thing that I want to focus on for the remaining time of our session here briefly, is the idea of happiness, because we will be talking about happiness when dealing with loving kindness, and then also inadvertently in an indirect manner when we work with compassion, empathetic joy, and equanimity. But especially with loving kindness will revolve around this word of happiness. So without asking you to share associations with the word happiness, I'll just go straight to the definition used in the Buddhist tradition on occasion. Happiness is a state that we want to extend or prolong when it's present, when it's there, and evoke when it's absent. So maybe right now I am feeling neutral, but then I think, hey, or maybe I don't even think, but subconscious, almost in the depth of my mind, there's that conceptual movement of perhaps assuming that if I were to have some tea, and I will have some tea now in a second, if I were to have some tea, I would experience some pleasure, and I would, and I will. So I just evoked some happiness for myself by drinking the tea. It was not there. The experience of drinking tea, the pleasure from drinking tea was not there. Then I wanted it, and then I evoked it. I brought it about. So that's one example of that. But of course, beyond that, we know there are much more profound types of happiness that are not reliant on outer stimulation, or even if they are, they're not as short-lasting as sipping tea. Something more profound, like the happiness of knowing you are in a truly satisfying relationship, meaningful relationship, not just romantic necessarily. So friendly relationship, familial relationship. You're truly in a profound, for those who believe in God, truly in a profound, satisfying relationship with the divine. And of course, the divine does not have to relate to God, because in some traditions, the divine is the elements, or our Buddha nature, or our spiritual lineage, and so forth. Being in that relationship can be a source of sustenance and happiness. Just knowing, thinking about it. Oh, I do belong to a lineage. I'm the latest link in that lineage, the smallest potato, but I am there. Isn't that wonderful? Sense of belonging. So there are absolutely things like that. And then, of course, there's a very helpful classification, very frequently quoted by Dr. Wallace, And that classification we'll absolutely have to revisit for working with loving kindness. And that is dividing all types of happiness into two major categories, two major subheadings. One of them is the so-called inner well-being or genuine well-being. And it is sometimes also called happiness of being, which is a wording sometimes used in CEB, in Cultivating Emotional Balance program. And I love that wording, actually. It's just happiness that arises from us existing. Well, how do we bring that about? As it says here on the slide, it's brought about from our inner state and from what we can give to the world. So it's almost something that radiates from the inside. Just because you exist, there's already a certain sense of well-being, a certain sense of happiness. If it's not there now, we can think, well, how can we bring that about? What would activate that? What would help us uncover that? And we'll keep exploring that, not just in this session, but in our future sessions as well, because of course, that's one of the big goals for the 4 immeasurables and all of our contemplative life, the big inner joy, the joy of being happy just because we exist, and then also radiating that so that others become happier just because we exist, because of what we're able to share with them. Wouldn't that be wonderful? So exploring that. I also love this little emoji here. It's doing the kissy face, but in a cute way. So us sharing sort of the kisses of loving kindness and compassion and empathetic joy and equanimity with the world, not a small thing, but in itself, that brings a certain sense of well-being. So that's one thought, one thing to contemplate here, very closely related to meditation and so forth. We don't meditate so that we feel the wonderful sensations in our knees and in our lower back, and then the pins and needles across our legs, and then all of that. No, that's not what we're practicing for. We're hoping to attain something deeper. And most likely also not career goals. I'll meditate and I'll become the greatest yogi and everybody would recognize me and I get 100,000 followers on social media. People do that even without meditating. So that's not the idea there. We spend those hours or minutes, depending on how much daily practice we have, for genuine well-being. But of course, also contemplative practice does support this somewhat in this other type of well-being, because we do become more concentrated. Our attention does become better. We do become more emotionally balanced, and thus we do in a way become better workers, which is one reason for some big corporations started sponsoring mindfulness trainings for their employees, even though eventually they've discovered that makes the employees more independent, more courageous, more clear about their boundaries and so forth, which in general is an absolutely wonderful thing that needs to happen. We do need to feel more empowered and more clear about also balanced ways of acquiring this type of happiness. Outer well-being, also referred to as hedonia, which is an experience of well-being that comes from outer stimulation. The happiness of having a good meal, the happiness of having shelter, clothing, education, medicine, medical support, friends, romantic relationships, seeing beautiful views. I mean, in Nepal, so many people, even now, and also during the pandemic, people were on occasion coming, when it was not the lockdown time, to go trekking. And what do they get to see? Their incredible, majestic views of incredible, majestic views of the Himalayas. And why? Because it brings about a very special experience. There is a eudaimonic component in that experience because it helps us come somewhat in touch with our deepest nature. But a lot of it is also, wow, outer beauty, incredible. And that's also part of this hedonia, just like eating cheese for some people, or vegan cheese for others, or bread and salt. It could be anything, popcorn, TV, music, all sorts of things bring about this outer well-being. But there's the general list of I need food, I need sleep, I need medical support, and so forth, that corresponds to what would be considered a dignified human existence. And ideally, when we think about the society, the country, the world, we hope to provide that to an adequate degree to everyone involved so that everybody gets enough and can live in a dignified manner. So considering those two, however, 4 measurables in terms of our inner practice have to do more with eudaimonic well-being, but when they pour out, they support us in being able to also provide hedonic well-being for ourselves and for others. That's the idea. And this is one of the contemplations that we would invite you to do that would be sent out. So you don't need to start that now. But that is one of the questions for journaling that we will all do. I will do it myself as well, of course. We will do on our own. That will be sent out after this session together with the recording and the slides and so forth. One of these questions: how much time over the last couple of days have I devoted to hedonic happiness? So chasing cheese, chasing kiwi, chasing popcorn, listening to music and so forth, or earning money, or acquiring medical support, hanging out with friends. All valid. Nobody says any of it is bad, but how much time did I spend doing that? And how much time did I spend cultivating eudaimonic well-being, happiness of being, by, for example, studying the associated ideas, going to therapy, meditating, and so forth. And no one says, oh, it has to be 100% eudaimonic well-being is 0% hedonic well-being, because that can only happen if you're already so privileged, you're drowning in money, and a servant is bringing food to your door every day, and then you can just devote yourself to meditating and being eudaimonically well. But even that is not realistic, because you will still have to clothe yourself and bathe yourself and so forth. So some attention would still go to hedonic well-being. But beyond that, most of us are not in that situation, including myself. And then we hustle, we do the thing, we get our food, we wash our body, we clothe ourselves and so forth. So, but still analyzing, asking. And then the next point: which activities in my current lifestyle are associated with eudaimonic well-being? Maybe none, maybe some. Just sort of taking that mental inventory and asking ourselves that. That would be the suggestion for journaling between this week and the next one. And then over the time, as we're going through this course, looking on these questions at the end of it and saying, hey, I did perhaps start spending a bit more time on happiness of being. That would be a good thing. Not at the neglect of our responsibilities towards our children and parents and communities and jobs and so forth, but just adding that a little bit, adding some moments or minutes, and then maybe one day hours of eudaimonic activities. So there's that. But now we'll do our practice, which will also seal the session, and that will be one of the practice suggestions for this week. Many people are very familiar with it. It's called the Vision Quest. It's Dr. Wallace's take on one of his multiple takes on the practice of loving kindness. But this take specifically works with our cognitive intelligence, with our ability to have wise desires, aspirations, and goals. And it works with those by means of the 4 questions that are also very applicable for journaling. People also practice with them in journaling. They use them in group activities and dyads and so forth. We'll explore some of those. And they use them in meditation. And so you would have a chance to work with those somewhat in meditation, following Dr. Wallace's voice or a more abbreviated version by one of my colleagues. For now, we'll also do a more abbreviated version that will take us to the end of the session. So please first stretch a little bit if that feels comfortable, and then find a comfortable position for meditation that will only last about 10 minutes. Once we're done with stretching, once we have taken a few sips of water if that's necessary, and just allowed ourselves to relax and feel good in our body, we assume the meditation posture, the one that we choose for this practice. And then once again, we bring our attention to the body. And with each out breath, we release physical tension as much as possible, just allowing ourselves to rest there deeply. Keeping our eyes closed for this practice, if that feels more comfortable. Resting, allowing the body to continue relaxing with each out breath. And in terms of our mind, while our body is resting in the aspect of simplicity, just not doing anything, allowing our mind to be creative and give rise to different general ideas that correspond to the following 4 questions. What would genuine flourishing look like to me in my own life? How do I envision genuine well-being? Asking that question and resting with it so that some form of spontaneous vision or general idea can arise in the space of our mind. It might be detailed, it might be very generic. For some, it might even just be a feeling, but that's good enough for now. General idea of what that genuine flourishing might look for us. And the response to that is wishing, may it be so. May I move towards that and experience that, realize that. Still breathing naturally and breathing life into this wish of may it be so with each out breath. Then the question that comes out of that, the second question, to attain this genuine well-being, to experience this genuine flourishing, what types of support and resources do I need to get from others and from the world? Once again, asking that question internally and resting with a space of the mind so that something can come up as our vision, as our general understanding of this. And then whatever it is that came to our mind as these types of support, wishing, may it be so. May I receive those and accept them. Maybe even drawing them towards ourselves with each in-breath. Still breathing naturally, still resting. Beyond that, to experience this genuine well-being, what do I need to change in myself? Not in terms of rejecting who I am, but in terms of changing my habit. Letting go of some habit, cultivating other habits. What is it that I would like to change and adjust in the long run? Once again, some general idea comes up and we respond to it by wishing, may it be so. May I bring that change about, transform, uncover my potential. And finally, within this vision of genuine flourishing, genuine well-being, genuine happiness, what gift would I like to share with the world? What's the most meaningful thing I would like to offer? And once again, something might come up, some general feeling, idea, understanding, and we respond to that by thinking, may it be so. And then as we breathe naturally, imagining spreading that gift across the world and trusting it to all beings, transforming the world in that way. And as we imagine sharing goodness with the world, we can also use this opportunity to seal this session with mental dedication, thinking that whatever goodness we've been able to apply and accumulate in this practice, with infinite generosity, we mentally share with the world at large and with all beings in it, along with that gift we were just thinking about, so that not just ourselves, but others might truly become embodiments and recipients of loving kindness, compassion, empathetic joy, and equanimity. With that, we release all thoughts and aspirations, returning to our body, noticing its experience and sensations, and how we feel right now in general, just noticing our state. And then with tenderness and kindness, introducing some movement, walking back and forth, moving fingers and toes, stretching, dancing, and slowly concluding both this meditation session and this class. Thank you very much. Very much apologize for taking one extra minute of your time. I know some people might be more sensitive about that, some less, but regardless, I think 2 hours is sort of the middle ground for a class that is doable. And this is where we start our home play. So you will actually get some prompts for journaling and this little prompt for creative work if you feel inspired to do that. And that's the creative prompt that says, what would a person experiencing happiness of being, a genuine well-being, radiate and do and look like? For people who are more visual, that might be an invitation to draw or paint. If you want to create a sculpture, go for it. That's way beyond my skills because I can only doodle. But that could be a thing. But it could also be a basis for writing something, a short snippet, or composing something like a poem or music if you feel inspired to. But whatever it is, accessing that expressive creative side of ourselves. So that's a creative prompt. What I mentioned earlier, that will be sent out in an email. Those are journaling prompts where we ideally write coherent thoughts. But of course, some people also draw and so forth, or do mental maps. That's also absolutely valid. So those, then for this week, we can just think about our priorities, aspirations with regards to hedonic and eudaimonic well-being. That's part of this soul searching or selflessness searching in a way, in a Buddhist way. And beyond that, practicing with the meditation that we just did, for which you would receive 2 different guided versions, or returning to the more foundational practice of settling our body, speech, and mind, for which you would also receive 2 different guided meditations, and you can choose between these 2 depending on what feels right. But my one suggestion would be to definitely do the Vision Quest practice once or twice at least, and beyond that you can play around with everything else. If you want to do it all the 7 days until the next class, that's even better, but there's some creativity and some wiggle room there for sure. Question here in the suggestion, it would be beneficial within the 2-hour session to have a small break. Sometimes we would definitely do that. We'll do 5-minute bio break. Sometimes we won't. It would depend on the flow. And the reason I'm mentioning that is, of course, with everybody sitting in front of their computers, most people, with the exception of me, do have the luxury of turning on their camera, doing whatever is needed, coming back and turning their camera on. So for that reason, we won't always do it. I'm the main victim here, at least that's how it feels, but sometimes we absolutely actually would. So it will always depend on the flow, and of course that's a valid and important suggestion. I've gotten somewhat used to sessions that last 4 hours long by now, which is the format we use for CEB, and that has somewhat desensitized me to the trials and tribulations of these shorter sessions. Okay, so thank you very much for showing up, for everything that you've done, for sharing, for practicing together in this community. And I very much hope to see all of you and more people next Saturday, Sunday, whatever it is, next Sunday, I guess, in our next class. And I hope that the practices and the creative prompts would truly keep your life interesting this week in the best possible sense of the word. The recordings and everything, that will all be sent out to you by email using the email address that you used when you registered. That will happen very soon after the session, today or tomorrow, essentially. So thank you very much and see you all soon. Bye-bye and have a beautiful, peaceful week.